Imagine that your future already exists. Not just one future, but thousands of them. Right now, at this very moment, there are countless possible versions of your life unfolding as potential. In one version, you take a risk and your career transforms. In another, you stay comfortable and nothing really changes. In another, a single conversation leads to a relationship that alters the direction of your entire life. From your perspective, it feels like the future hasn't happened yet. But physics tells a stranger story. In quantum mechanics, reality does not begin as a single outcome. It begins as a field of probabilities, a cloud of possibilities waiting to become real. Only when an event occurs does that cloud collapse into one specific outcome. In physics, this is known as the collapse of the wave function. But here's the fascinating question. If reality itself begins as probabilities, how do certain possibilities become real while others never happen? Why do some futures emerge while others disappear? And more importantly, can human behavior influence which probabilities become reality? To answer that question, we need to travel through three different fields of knowledge: quantum physics, neuroscience, and psychology. Because somewhere at the intersection of these disciplines lies a powerful insight. Your future is not a fixed path, it's a probability landscape, and your mind may be one of the mechanisms navigating it. To understand what this means, let's start with a strange property of the universe itself. In classical physics, the physics of Newton and Galileo, reality behaves like a machine. If you know the position and velocity of every object, you can predict exactly what will happen next. The universe becomes deterministic. But when scientists began studying atoms and subatomic particles, that certainty disappeared. At the quantum level, particles behave in a fundamentally different way. Instead of existing in a single state, they exist in many possible states simultaneously. Electrons do not orbit the nucleus like tiny planets. Instead, they exist as probability waves, mathematical distributions describing where they might appear if measured. For measurement, the electron is not in one specific location. It exists as many potential locations. Physicists call this superposition. And when a measurement occurs, the wave of possibilities collapses into a single outcome. Suddenly, the electron appears in one specific place. The question that puzzled physicists for decades was simple. What exactly causes that collapse? This puzzle became known as the measurement problem. Some interpretations suggested that physical interaction with the environment causes the collapse. Others speculated that observation itself plays a role. Whether or not consciousness literally collapses quantum waves remains debated among physicists. But one thing is clear. The universe fundamentally operates through probabilities rather than certainties. Reality is not a rigid script. It is a distribution of possible outcomes. Now let's shift from physics to the human brain. Because neuroscientists have discovered something fascinating about how our minds work. Your brain is not a passive receiver of reality. It is a prediction machine. According to neuroscientist Karl Friston's free energy principle and predictive processing theory, the brain constantly generates models of the world. Instead of simply reacting to sensory input, your brain actively predicts what it expects to perceive. Then it compares incoming information to those predictions. In other words, perception is not just seeing what is there. Perception is a process of prediction and correction. Your brain is constantly trying to reduce uncertainty by predicting what will happen next. Think about walking down the stairs. You don't consciously calculate every step. Your brain predicts where the next step will be. Think about catching a ball. Your brain predicts the ball's trajectory before it arrives. Prediction is the core function of the nervous system. But prediction also shapes something deeper. Your expectations influence your actions, and your actions influence outcomes, which means your expectations indirectly shape reality. Psychology has known this for decades. One of the most famous demonstrations of this principle is the self-fulfilling prophecy. When people strongly believe something will happen, their behavior often unconsciously shifts in ways that make the outcome more likely. In the 1960s, psychologist Robert Rosenthal conducted an experiment in schools that became famous. Teachers were told that certain students were intellectual bloomers who were expected to show dramatic improvement during the year. In reality, those students had been chosen randomly. But by the end of the year, those students actually performed better. Why? Because the teachers subtly treated them differently. They gave them more attention, more encouragement, more patience. Expectations changed behavior. Behavior changed outcomes. What began as a probability became a reality. Now let's connect this insight back to physics. If reality contains multiple possible futures, then small changes in behavior can alter the probability landscape. This is where ideas from complexity science and chaos theory become relevant. In complex systems, small changes can produce massive long-term effects. Meteorologist Edward Lorenz discovered this while studying weather patterns. He found that tiny differences in initial conditions could lead to completely different outcomes over time. This phenomenon became known as the butterfly effect. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil might influence the formation of a tornado in Texas weeks later. The idea sounds poetic, but it reflects a deep property of nonlinear systems. Small causes can have large consequences. Human lives are complex systems. Your habits, decisions, relationships, and beliefs interact in ways that amplify over time. One conversation can lead to a job opportunity. One decision can lead to a move to another city. One meeting can lead to a lifelong partnership. These events feel random, but they are shaped by probabilities. And probabilities shift through behavior. Let's think about this in terms of what many people call manifestation. The word manifestation often carries mystical connotations. People imagine that thoughts alone magically create reality. But a more scientifically grounded interpretation is possible. Instead of magic, think in terms of probability navigation. When you change your mindset, you do not instantly alter the laws of physics, but you do change how you perceive opportunities. You change how you respond to situations. You change the risks you are willing to take. You change the environments you enter. Each of these changes shifts the probability landscape of your life. A person who believes opportunities exist is more likely to notice them. A person who believes success is possible is more likely to pursue difficult goals. Over time, these behaviors compound. Psychologist Albert Bandura called this self-efficacy, the belief that you are capable of influencing outcomes. People with high self-efficacy attempt more challenges and persist longer in the face of difficulty. That persistence dramatically increases the probability of success. This doesn't guarantee specific outcomes, but it shifts the odds. Your future becomes statistically different. Now let's bring in another concept from neuroscience: neuroplasticity. The brain constantly rewires itself based on experience. Neural pathways strengthen when they are repeatedly activated. Psychologist Donald Hebb famously summarized this principle with a phrase that became foundational in neuroscience: neurons that fire together, wire together. Every habit strengthens certain neural circuits while weakening others. Over time, your identity emerges from these patterns. Your thoughts influence neural activity. Neural activity influences behavior. Behavior influences outcomes. Outcomes reshape beliefs. This creates a feedback loop. What begins as a possibility slowly becomes a trajectory. And that trajectory increases the probability of certain futures. Think of it like carving a path through a forest. The first time you walk through, the path barely exists. But if you walk it every day, the ground becomes worn and the path becomes easier to follow. Eventually, that route becomes the default. Neural pathways work in a similar way. Repeated behaviors create mental highways. This is why habits are so powerful. Small actions repeated over time reshape the probability structure of your life. Now let's step back and consider something deeper. Why does the universe operate through probabilities at all? Why isn't everything deterministic? Some physicists believe probability is a fundamental feature of reality. Others argue that probabilities emerge from deeper hidden structures. But what matters for our discussion is that uncertainty is built into the fabric of the universe. The future is not fully determined. And that uncertainty creates room for influence, not magical control. but probabilistic influence. Your actions don't guarantee specific outcomes, but they shift the likelihood of those outcomes. And when millions of small decisions accumulate over time, those probability shifts become significant. This insight reframes the idea of personal transformation. Change rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it emerges from a gradual accumulation of small probability shifts. Every choice nudges the system. Every habit alters the trajectory. Over time, those nudges create entirely different futures. Consider the difference between two people who begin in identical circumstances. One reads books regularly, exercises, and networks with new people. The other avoids challenges and stays within familiar routines. 5 years later, their lives may look completely different, not because of destiny, but because of probabilities. One path increased the likelihood of growth. The other preserved the status quo. Now let's talk about relationships, because this probabilistic perspective applies there too. Every relationship exists as a dynamic system. Two people interacting create feedback loops of behavior and expectation. When partners encourage each other's growth, they create positive reinforcement cycles. When they criticize or withdraw, they create negative cycles. Psychologist John Gottman, who has studied relationships for decades, found that healthy couples maintain roughly 5 positive interactions for every negative one. That ratio increases the probability of long-term stability. Again, language of probability appears. Not guarantees, but tendencies. The way people treat each other shifts the likelihood of different relationship outcomes. Understanding life as a probability landscape also changes how we think about failure. If reality were deterministic, failure might mean that success was never possible. But in a probabilistic universe, failure simply means one path did not work. Other paths remain open. The key question becomes, how do you navigate toward more favorable probabilities? The answer lies in attention, behavior, and environment. Attention shapes perception. Perception shapes decision-making. Decisions shape actions. Actions shape outcomes. And environments amplify or suppress opportunities. When people talk about changing their life, what they are really doing is altering these variables. They expose themselves to new environments. They adopt new habits. They develop new ways of thinking. Each change modifies the probability field of their future. And eventually, a new trajectory emerges. From the outside, it may look like a sudden transformation. But underneath, it was a gradual reconfiguration of probabilities. So the next time you think about your future, imagine it not as a single predetermined path. Imagine it as a landscape of possibilities. Some paths are currently unlikely. Others are more probable. But probabilities are not fixed. They shift. With every decision, with every habit, with every new experience. Your mind is constantly predicting, adapting, and learning. And through that process, you are navigating the field of possible futures. Not through magic, not through certainty, but through the quiet mathematics of probability. And perhaps the most empowering realization is this: the future is not something that simply happens to you. It is something you continuously shape, one small probability shift at a time.